because I haven't scrutinized it for myself.
Oh, all right. We sitting here with Richard Folsom
It's true.
of Florida.
Mariana, Florida.
Mariana,
Jackson
Florida.
County.
Okay. He's an author. He's got, how many books you got out?
I published 4 or 5, and I've got about 4 or 5 more that I haven't published, like the one you're holding in your hand.
Yeah. Okay. This is the book you're working on right now.
That's true.
Okay. Let's just read a part of it. See what it's all about. It says, the secret I mentioned at the beginning of this book is what I've been alluding to this whole time, which is that most people don't know or believe that what we think is the real world. Is it? Oh, let me read that again. That what we think is the real world is absolutely not.
That's true.
It is only real to the physical portion of us, but not at all to the totality of our being. You have to think about it much like you think about a TV. You have many programs of different frequencies and all different and independent from each other, coming out of the same set. So we as human egos are in the physical dimension frequency world we will be in while we are in what we call life, between birth and death. Since there is no such thing as death to the soul, we go to other dimensions when our body dies.
Now read this up to the edge there.
Law of physics, energy can neither be created or destroyed, only changed. So our soul is energy.
Absolutely. Everything is energy.
What is our soul?
Our soul is the portion of our consciousness that was here before the physical body was born. It's here now, and it'll be here what's left after the physical body dies. It's the part that is eternal. When if you go back to the olden times when the pharaohs and the ancient civilizations buried the dead with food and boats and
People still do that.
yeah, that's true. It's because they don't understand that the physical part of you dies at what we determine as death.
Mm-hmm.
But there is really no such thing as death to the totality of us, which is we're not just the body.
So our soul is actually who we are.
Absolutely.
And then what we see is just,
We create this physical world that we're in right now by our perception. When our sensory perception observes something like the grass,
mm-hmm.
we're taught from this size that that's grass, that's
Right.
green, that's the sky, it's blue. So that's the way we learn things. So the next time we see that wavelength or that frequency of energy through our memory, that's what we read out as but that's only our observation of that frequency of energy ran through our sensory perception system and memory, and that's what we call everything, but actually that's just a bunch of molecules down there.
Right.
But we have forgotten or never did learn how to perceive that energy as energy, and that's what separates us from the higher spiritual beings that can tune in that frequency of energy as what it is. So they have a much better idea of the truth of what reality is.
So your soul doesn't really look anything like you look, like your body.
No, absolutely it does.
Oh, it does.
It's a complete replica, but it's vibrating at a different speed, so it's a
But then, do you believe in reincarnation?
absolutely.
So your soul would look like.
It'll look like, if it takes on a different body, it'll look like that body, because there's no physical in that.
So this reincarnation, is this just like if you die, you're going to become a baby here on Earth in the same dimension? Or could you go to a completely different dimension?
Well, there's no limit to what you could be. And I'll tell you how the sorcerers explain it. Let's say that the whole universe is comprised of luminous lines of energy. Our top scientists today have figured out the string theory. That's the greatest achievement that physicists have made in our day and time. Now, that everything is made out of these. But the ancient sorcerers knew this thousands of years ago, because they could see energy as it existed in the universe, not the way we identified it through our ego and our sensual perception. So, when they saw human beings, they could see the aura, or the electrical field surrounding the physical body, which is called the aura. And it's several stages. It's I think 9
Chakras?
Yeah. Each layer, the etheric, all these layers of energy that surround what they call the cocoon, which is the totality of all the energy.
Mm-hmm.
And the way they line up with the existing lines of force in the universe are what determines what the world is that you're in. So right now we're in the physical dimensional, three-dimensional world, because that's the alignment of our energy with the lines of the energy of surround us in our environment.
Before we get too deep into this, while I got you on camera here,
Okay.
you don't want to be known for this, but it's we kind of think it's a big deal. Tell us about the time that you buried yourself.
Okay. Well, let me go just a little bit further into what I was explaining.
Okay.
It'll be easier to understand. They noticed that there's a bright spot on the aura of all human cocoons that they have noticed. They're able to see.
Who is this?
The ancient sorcerer.
Not the scientist.
No.
Okay.
No. And their information, their knowledge exceeds the physical scientists of today. They're like kindergarten students compared to college graduates of the sorcerers. That's because they were able to see energy as it existed and to not observe everything through these eyes, but through the astral eyes.
Are there any sorcerers in this day and age? Any good ones?
I'm sure there are. This information was predominant in the Americas and the United States, Mexico, and South America, when Cortez came over and discovered these people that had not been known to the Europeans or the Asians.
Would this be the same thing as a brujo?
Yes, the brujo was a part of it, and let me get back to what I was saying, and I'll bring that out. They said that they discovered, realized that when a person is asleep, that what they call the assemblage point, which is the bright spot on the aura that connects with the energy, the luminous lines of the world. So when that spot can move around inside the cocoon of the individual when he's asleep, they concluded that that's what creates the dream world. So if you're dreaming, then your assemblage point is moving to another portion of the universe, or the energy of the universe. And so you are in a different universe than the one you're in right now, which is dictated by your consciousness through your sensory perception. Okay, now if you get back to the Bruo, that if you move your assemblage point to another position, then your readout of that information is a different world. Just like I don't know if you had a dream last night, but if you had a dream, you were in some other place than right here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you realize that? Okay, now where was that spot? Where was that place?
I don't know.
You don't know. Well, a sorcerer would know, because he would be able to duplicate that position of his assemblage point and recreate that dream world.
I wonder if that's how Jacob did it. Joseph.
I don't know. Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, he used to interpret the dreams of the...
Okay, very, very possibly that's what he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But see, that information, let me digress for another second here to explain something. Back at the time when all the religious scriptures were being written, all the different religions were being formed all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
The general consensus of all human beings at that time was that the earth is flat.
Mm-hmm.
And if you went too far, you'd fall off the end of the earth.
There's still a lot of people that believe that.
Erroneously, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, that's not. Isaac Newton was sitting under an apple tree, so the story goes.
Mm-hmm.
We can't be absolutely positive about all ancient information that we know, because history changes.
Yep.
So he observed an apple falling out of a tree, and he got to wondering, now why did that apple fall down?
Mm-hmm.
You know, common sense will tell you that the weight made it fall, and he discovered through higher thinking that the earth was a sphere, and that gravity is what pulled that apple to the ground. It was, if you're on the North Pole, say this is the earth, and you're on the North Pole, and I ask you which way is up, you're going to point this way.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're on the South Pole, and I ask you which way is up, you're going to point this way. So this way and that way both can't be the same.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's just their perception.
So it comes from gravity going to the center of the sphere. And so that when people got to understanding that, their whole idea of everything changed. That's the same way that right now the idea of spirit and soul and ego are changing. We're getting into the new age of enlightenment, and so human evolution has caused us to understand a lot greater detail than we did hundreds, thousands, millions of years ago.
Well, if that's the case, then why was there more? Why did we have these ancient not scholars, but sorcerers? And now you said the scientists don't know as much as they did.
That's true. And that goes back to religion. Cortez came over here presumably in search of treasure, gold, silver, and he was doing it in the name of God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what it was all. He tried to convert all these, he called them heathens because they did not believe in the same thing that the Europeans believed as their God.
Mm-hmm.
So they, through disease and cruelty and war, they killed off the ancient sorcerers to a great degree and drove the rest of them that survived underground. And like still today, if you say, or if suppose I say, I have studied sorcery, which comes from the word source. That's the source of information comes when they call it sorcery. The sorcery is not some hocus pocus thing. It is the study of energy as related to the human being. So, as we have learned more about it, that's why Don Juan called himself a sorcerer, because he understood what he was talking about. But the Christian people who came over searching for gold and then for their God, to take back to their church, to build huge cathedrals and pay the Pope, their idea was totally different. That was ego motivated. It did not come from the spiritual portion of the consciousness that transcends this physical reality that we're in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sufficient answer, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, that's great. It was 4 feet deep.
Okay, now we'll get back to that. Okay, I had just went through I'll call it a battle, because I'm not immune to ego either. I like pretty women.
Mm-hmm.
I like a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
I like the bass boat and the travel trailer, and I like all the things that everybody else likes, because I have an ego also, and the ego craves satisfaction in keeping itself happy. So I learned.
So you haven't had an ego death?
That's what the whole was all about.
So you did have an ego death?
I did, yes. Absolutely. And now the Christian today, they all stress you've got to be born again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to be born again, that implies something's got to die in order to be born again. So what has to die? It's not the physical body has to die, but it's the ego portion of the consciousness of the physical body has to die. You got to overcome that craving of the ego.
Yeah.
And let the spirit, what Jesus was talking about, love thy neighbor,
Mm-hmm.
Do unto others.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot, a rich man can't go to heaven,
Mm-hmm.
because if you're rich, if you want to amass more treasure or material wealth than me, then that's your ego talking.
Yeah.
And your ego is what keeps you from being a spiritual. And That's what separated Jesus from the rest of the people, was the fact that he could go and come in the spiritual consciousness as well as transcend the ego. So when he was in his spiritual consciousness, he was vibrating at a different frequency, and it transcended the physical laws of physics. So he could walk on the water, he could fly through the air, he could heal the sick, he could cure the blind. That is what made him to be different from everybody else. And anything that was different to that degree was called a god.
So you believe that Jesus did all that?
Absolutely. And I also believe that the ancient sorcerers had the same power to transcend consciousness, to go into the spiritual area
Mm-hmm.
and get out of the ego area. And that's what my whole life has been about, and that's what the whole was about. That's why I went in there, to get rid of my ego.
And this was out in the middle of the woods somewhere?
Yes, it was.
And you got down in the hole, and your friends covered you up?
Yeah, my nephew was living with me at the time, because I was in transition. I was my idea behind, he had been in prison, and he had been in solitary confinement for a long time, and we talked a great deal about that. And I related that to Don Juan talking about the ancient sorcerers.
Mm-hmm.
They would dig a hole in the ground and cover up, not to kill themselves, not to get rid of it, but to get in control of the ego. They didn't call it the ego. They had other terms for the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I choose to use ego, and it's not the Freudian definition of ego and superego and id and all that. But yes, that's why I dug that hole.
Well, how long were you in there?
I don't know, because I went in there for sensory deprivation. Now, what does that mean? You have no input into the five senses:
Mm-hmm.
sight, smell, taste, feel, and those. So I had no reference to all that, because I went in to devoid myself of
So you went unconscious?
I can't say what I went, because I cannot remember, because this me is not the same me. Might be the same body, but it's not the same me. And that's one of the hardest things for people to understand, is this is not me. This is my body. But me is in this body also. And I went in there to overcome or overpower my ego consciousness, which is the I want, I like, I gotta have part of us. I wanted to get rid of that, or get in control. I didn't want to. It's easy to get rid of it. You can put a bullet in through your brain, and it's gone, because the physical body dies. And the ego is created by the physical body. So if you get rid of the body, which is going to happen, it's happened to everybody, even to Jesus it happened. But that's what's so hard to understand, because you can't create a body in a test tube or a laboratory.
You can clone one.
You can do that, yeah.
They don't have souls.
I don't know. That's a very good question. I've never pondered that.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well, now AI is the big thing now.
absolutely, they say that's going to take over the physical world. But that doesn't really matter because the physical world is a creation anyway. And it is
Of our own imagination.
I have to think about
Who
that.
created it?
Who created anything? Now, a Christian or a religious person will tell you God did it.
Mm-hmm.
A scientist will tell you, no, the amino acids were brought together by the environment of the components of the early universe and created microscopic life, and then that combined lightning strikes and it developed into one cell animals, and then that developed into more and more and more until you end up with what we are today.
So you was able, once you finally came to or felt like you was ready to get out, you was able to push it off of you.
Yes.
By yourself.
I didn't go in there to kill myself.
Yeah.
I went in there to control my ego.
Well, how'd you know when to get up?
I don't know. I can't answer that because I really don't know. I have, even though I was there, and this is hard to understand even for me, even though I was there, I have my memory stops right there. And it is recreated right there. So I was successful in doing that, which gave me the insight to be able to think more spiritually in that area of consciousness than the ego consciousness. So I've had my idea when I went in there was, I'm not getting out of this. I'm going in there and I'm going to stay until I have conquered everything standing in between me and happiness, because I was dealing with some pretty heavy things. My whole life was changing because I had been married for 18 years, and I decided at one point that I've got to be me. I can't be us and we like I had been before. I got to be me. And in order to do that, I had to step out of that position that I was in and get in another position, which was, I was the person I was trying to satisfy, not everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to do that, there were too many distractions. Visitor would come to the house, TV would come on, telephone would ring, things like that were all distractions that stood in the way of getting deep into the transition I was trying to make.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that made sense. And apparently it worked, because my whole life changed from the day I got out of that place until now. I still have bouts. See, once you get a hold of the ego, you're gonna hold that sucker by the neck and never let go, because he's never gonna give up trying to take over control of you again. So you got to fight to keep him in control.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I've tried to do. And I've been pretty successful because I'm able to be happy. And that's what my first book was all about, how to be happy. Because if you're living in your ego consciousness, you're never going to be happy, because you can't satisfy an ego. The richest man in the world right now has $262 billion, and he's going to war with the Ukraine, trying to take them over too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you're not going to satisfy an ego.
Yeah.
And so what you have to do is get in control of that ego. And that's what I have been trying to do. And that's what my whole life is about. And that's why, like I told you a while ago, I quit what I was doing for this opportunity to pass knowledge on that I have accumulated in my little short life, 80 years, which ain't all that short compared to a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, who was your mentor?
I've had a lot of them, but I think my most important was probably Carlos Castaneda.
So you consider Carlos more? Well, I thought you might say Don Juan.
Well, Don Juan Carlos was the apprentice to learn the information that Don Juan.
So Don Juan was his mentor, and Carlos
Right.
was more your mentor.
And Carlos was the 26th generation of hands-on passing this information from master to apprentice and down like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, like I said, I've been studying that philosophy for over 40 years,
So did
probably for 50 years.
Did you have to use psychedelic?
Well, what Don Juan says about that, he says everybody doesn't need to do that. He said, but it helps in some cases to stop the world. That's one of the first terms you're going to come across when you read Don Juan's works, is you have to stop the world. And for a lot of years, I didn't know what he meant.
Well, the church uses that same phrase, overcome the world.
Yep, that's true. And you have to, because the church is doing exactly the same thing, except they're influenced by the ego in the man-made religions.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have anything against a religious person.
Mm-hmm.
It's the religious administration that bugs me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was brought up in a Baptist. I'm going to piss off everybody in religion, but I'm going to tell what my idea of it is.
Mm-hmm.
I was brought up in and I relate all religions as being Baptist.
Yeah.
Because they all stand for the same thing.
Yeah.
Even though they're miles in between one philosophy and another. You know, all of the great religions, the major religions that have a billion people.
You ever been to a Pentecostal church?
Yes.
You see them speak in tongues and stuff?
Oh yes. My sister sat right beside me and
Do you think she's in another dimension, or what is that?
it's
Or is it a put on?
no, it's not put on.
Okay.
It's an actual thing. It's Don Juan, when you get further on into the philosophy, he talks about the first attention and the second attention.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking generally about the consciousness, and that is there's other levels of consciousness, and that I would consider to be another level of consciousness. And this is such a complicated subject to talk about, even to learned people, but somebody whose only information about religion comes from a little country church or self-ordained pastor, they have been, the message has been perverted, in my estimation,
Mm-hmm.
by the different interpretations of the message. And when they say that to have eternal life, you got to believe that Jesus died to save your sin.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't believe that at all. Jesus came into this consciousness because he was able to transcend the physical dimension and come from the spiritual dimension at will. And so that gave him the power and authority to try to tell everybody here what he experienced up here. And the ego cannot understand that because it's educated in a different way than so when they say you got to believe that in order to keep from going to hell, which is again I think and who's to say if my opinion is any better or worse than anybody else's, but hell is a state of mind rather than a state of reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can be in it. That poor man that came to me last night, he was in agony because he was having trouble with his wife. And he was just almost berserk from the trying to do the right thing, and it was just overloading him, and he was about to go crazy. And so I sat down and I talked with him for a little while, and I eased his understanding. But what had caused most of his problems was trying to live up with his early religious training.
Yeah.
And it don't work. I'm sorry, but it don't work. That Jesus didn't come here to save your sins. He come here to tell you how to save your own sins, which is to overcome the ego and go into the spiritual consciousness where everything is glorious. It is love. There's no wealth or pride or all those the original sins.
So Don Juan, they used mescaline.
That's right. They
what we call peyote, but he wouldn't refer to it as that.
Did you read deep enough to meet Mescalito, who is the energy being represented by the peyote mushroom?
Okay, so you never did say the name to the part that I read.
Well, you hadn't read deep enough.
Yeah.
See, that's why I told you.
But he was talking about Carlos was playing with
the dog.
Yeah, but he wouldn't call it a dog. He would call it.
No, it appeared as a dog to him because it is in another dimension of consciousness.
But you never had to do all that.
No, I never. I've tried to follow the philosophy that made sense to me, which was give up all your ego traits, is what I call it. Don Juan described it as being an impeccable warrior, which meant that you cannot be. See, that they learned from the being overcome by the conquistadors that came in and killed off all the people. There were millions of people inhabiting the Mexican and the rainforest in South America that's now just under jungles, and